Greetings to those who watch below. Today we're going to continue Vampire Week by looking at some maybe lesser known mythological vampires from around the world. But before we start, I'd like to say thank you to Steffi Ray, Wicked Witch, Lisa Watts, Lefty Kim, M.A. Wade, Julie B, Jess Black Curtin, Christina Groves, LT Punisher 666 and Chris BLK Chris for being those who dwell below. An exclusive channel membership you can check out using the link in the description box. Also, don't forget to check me out on the creepypasta.com official YouTube channel and on Instagram at brimstone_below and on Facebook at Brimstone Below Horror Channel. But for now, sit back, relax and enjoy. The Bruxsa. The Bruxsa are a feared species of vampire found in Portugal. This bloodsucker was usually a woman who became a vampire through witchcraft. The Bruxsa are considered vampires due to their love for drinking children's blood. When she's not feeding on children, she likes to torment travellers. Like the Aswang, she leaves her home at night and flies in the shape of a large bird in search for her prey. But she also assumes the form of other animals, like a rat, ant, or wolf. Due to their animal transformations, Bruxsa are often associated with the Lobishmen, which are Portuguese werewolves. It was believed that a Bruxa's powers were confined to the hours of midnight till 2 in the morning. She got her powers from Satan, who she worshipped together with others of her kind. The Bruxsa would gather at crossroads on Tuesdays and Fridays to get their worship on. Once finished, they gained even more evil powers. Unlike most vampires, there is no known way to destroy a Bruxsa. They're invincible. However, there are ways to protect your children from them. The most common method of protection was amulets made of steel or iron. On top of that, people would sew garlic into their children's clothing, or they would put a steel nail in the ground and a pair of scissors under their pillow to keep the Bruxsa away. If all else fails, there are also a handful of incantations that can be spoken to ward off this vampire. If a Bruxsa has already killed a child, the mother can also seek revenge. She wouldn't be able to kill the witch, of course, but she could hurt it. To do this, she had to boil her child's clothes while stabbing them with a sharp instrument. The vampire would supposedly feel the jabs on her own body, and would be forced to come and beg for mercy. Mercy she probably didn't get. The Baobhan Sith. The legendary Baobhan Sith are also known as the White Women of the Scottish Highlands. These mystical creatures took the form of a beautiful woman, lurking in the Highlands, waiting to seduce young travellers and drink their blood. Thought to be fairies, the Baobhan Sith were generally withdrawn from society. They didn't care about power, wealth, or youth. They only cared about feeding, luring young hunters in by inviting them to dance with them until they grew too exhausted to overpower the Baobhan Sith. They would then feed upon their helpless victims, draining them dry of blood. Unlike other vampires, the Baobhan Sith would use their long, sharp fingernails to slit their victims' necks in order to drink their blood. Settled in the mountains and forests, the Baobhan Sith would often lure in Highland hunters, drawn to the men by the smell of blood from their kills. Legend has it that these women had hooves instead of feet, which they kept hidden under their long dresses, and unlike their vampire cousins, who were fond of shape-shifting into bats, the Baobhan Sith favoured a wolf form. There were never any known male Baobhan Sith, but if a woman is killed by one of these creatures, she will turn into one. They had only 2 known weaknesses. They had a fear of horses, and they were vulnerable to iron, the only known substance which could kill them. The most popular tale of the Baobhan Sith tells the story of a young group of hunters who stopped for the night in a small hunting lodge. The men built a fire and began eating, drinking, and expressing general merriment after a good day's hunt. As they began to say how nice it would be to have the company of women, there was a knock at the door. 4 beautiful women stood in the doorway, having become lost in the wilderness and asking if they may join the men in their shelter for the night. The men, silently congratulating themselves on their good fortune, invite the women in. After a while, the women express a wish to dance, and the men waste no time in asking them. The 4 men coupled off perfectly. Soon the dancing became more vigorous, and before the men knew what was happening, the Baobhan Sith had slit all their throats, but for one man, who was nearest the door. He bolted as soon as he realised what was happening, and ran over to the horses in a frenzy. It was here he realised the Baobhan Sith were not coming near the horses. The man stood weary-eyed among the animals all night. Just before dawn, the women headed back towards the wild. The lone man cautiously headed back towards the hunting lodge, hearing no sound from within. When he looked inside, he saw his 3 comrades dead on the floor, their skin almost translucent, as they lay completely drained of blood. The first Greek vampire. Ambrosio was a young adventurer. Born and raised in Italy, he had always longed to travel to Greece to have his fortune told by the Oracle of Delphi. When he was an adult, he got on a boat and sailed to the western edge of Greece, near Astakos. He travelled east until he eventually reached the city of Delphi. Delphi was home to a great temple for Apollo the sun god. It was also the home of the Pythia, better known as the oracles. The Pythia would sit in a chamber within the temple and speak of prophecies inspired by Apollo to those who came to seek their wisdom. When Ambrosio finally arrived at the temple, he went to speak to the Pythia. The Pythia, whose words were often cryptic, said only these few: "The curse, the moon, the blood will run." Ambrosio couldn't sleep that night. He stayed awake outside of the temple, pondering the meaning of the Pythia's words. As the sun rose in the morning, he realised that he had not slept. As he walked back toward town, he saw a beautiful woman dressed in white robes walking to the temple. He ran over to her and introduced himself. Her name was Selene, and she was a maiden of the temple. Her sister was an oracle, and so Selene tended to the temple and took care of her sister while she was in her entranced state. For the next few days, every morning Ambrosio met Selene at dawn before she entered the temple. They soon fell in love. On his last day in Greece, Ambrosio asked Selene to marry him and return with him to Italy. She agreed. He said he would make the preparations, then meet her at dawn the next morning at their meeting spot outside of the temple. However, Apollo had been watching. He himself had taken a liking to the beautiful Selene and was enraged that Ambrosio would come to his temple and take one of his maidens away. At sunset that night, Apollo appeared to Ambrosio and cursed him, so that from that day forth, a mere touch of Apollo's sunlight would burn Ambrosio's skin. Ambrosio was distraught. He was set to leave with Selene in the morning, but he would not be able to meet her at sunrise as he promised because of the curse. Having nowhere else to turn, he ran to a cave that led to Hades for protection. Hades, the god of the underworld, listened to his tale and made him a deal. If he could steal the silver bow of Artemis and bring it back, Hades would grant him and Selene protection in the underworld. The deal specified that Hades would give Ambrosio a magical wooden bow to hunt with. He was to offer his hunting trophies to Artemis in order to gain her favour and steal her silver bow. As collateral, Ambrosio had to leave his soul in Hades until he returned with the bow. Should he return without the silver bow, he would have to live in Hades forever, never to return to Selene. Having no other choice, Ambrosio agreed. He had no way to contact Selene. He had parchments, but no writing implement. So he took his bow and arrow and killed a swan. Using its feather as a pen and its blood as the ink, he wrote her a note explaining that he could not meet with her, but would find a way for them to be together. He left the note in their meeting place and ran off to find a place to hide in the sunlight. Naturally, Selene was devastated when she found the note, but she kept working at the temple as she did not want to anger Apollo any further. The next morning, Selene went back to the meeting place, but once again Ambrosio was not there. She saw another piece of parchment with writing in blood on it. It was a love poem from Ambrosio. Before mourning for 44 days, Ambrosio slew a swan and used its blood to write Selene a love poem. After draining the blood and taking a single feather, he offered the body of the swan as tribute to Artemis, the goddess of hunting and the moon, and also sister to Apollo. He hoped that even if he could not steal her bow, she would be honoured by the tribute and would be able to convince her brother Apollo to remove the curse. On the 45th night, Ambrosio had only one arrow left. He shot it at a swan and missed, the arrow sailing into the distance. He had neither the blood to write Selene's poem with, nor the swan to sacrifice to Artemis. He fell to the ground and wept. Seeing how good of a hunter and how dedicated of a follower Ambrosio had been, Artemis came down to him. He begged Artemis to let him borrow her bow and an arrow, so he could kill one last bird and leave one final note to Selene. Artemis took pity on him and agreed to let him borrow her silver bow and an arrow. He took the bow, and in desperation ran to the cave that led to Hades. Artemis realized what was happening and cast her own curse on Ambrosio. The curse caused all silver to burn his skin. Ambrosio dropped the silver bow and fell to the ground in pain. Artemis was furious at his deceit, but he begged her for forgiveness. He explained the deal he was forced to make with Hades, his curse by Apollo, and his love for Selene. He apologized profusely and swore that he had no other choice. Artemis again took pity on him and decided to give him one last chance. She offered to make him a great hunter, almost as great as she was, with the speed and strength of a god and fangs with which to drain the blood of the beasts to write his poems. In exchange for this immortality, he would have to agree to a deal. He and Selene would have to escape Apollo's temple and worship only Artemis forever. The catch was that Artemis was a virgin goddess, and all of her followers had to remain chaste and unmarried. So Ambrosio was never allowed to touch Selene again. They could never kiss, never touch, never have children. Ambrosio agreed. At least this way, he and Selene could be together. He killed another swan and left Selene a note telling her to meet him on a ship at the docks. Before dawn the next morning, she saw the note and ran away before Apollo could notice. When Selene arrived at the dock, she found Ambrosio's ship and met him down in the hull. There was a wooden coffin with a note on it, telling her to order the ship's captain to set sail, and to open the coffin only after the sun had set. She did as the note said, and after sunset she opened the coffin to find Ambrosio alive and well. The couple sailed to Ephesus, where they lived in a cave during the day and worshipped Artemis at her grand temple every night. They lived happily together for many years, never touching, never kissing, never having children. After a number of years, Ambrosio's immortality allowed him to stay young, but Selene continued to age as a mortal. She finally fell ill and was on her deathbed. Ambrosio was distraught, knowing that he would not join Selene in the afterlife because his soul still resided in Hades. At night, he went into the woods and found a white swan swimming alone in a small lake. He killed the swan and offered it to Artemis, begging for her to make Selene immortal so they could stay together forever. Artemis appeared to him, thankful for his years of dedication and worship. She made him one last deal. Artemis told Ambrosio he could touch Selene just once, to drink her blood. Doing so would kill her mortal body, but from then on, her blood mixed with his could create eternal life for any who drink of it. If he did this, Artemis would see to it that they stayed together forever. Ambrosio wanted to refuse, but after telling Selene what happened, she begged him to do it. After much convincing, he bit her neck and took her blood into his body. As he set her limp body down, Selene began to radiate with light and raised up to the sky. Ambrosio watched as Selene's glowing spirit lifted to meet Artemis at the moon. When she arrived, the moon lit up with a brilliant light. Selene became the goddess of moonlight, and every night she would reach down with her rays of light to the earth and finally touch her beloved Ambrosio, as well as all of their children. the newly created vampires who carried the blood of Ambrosio and Selene together. The Viesczy. The Kashubs, a Slavic people found in northern Europe, specifically along the Baltic Sea and Poland, in the region of West Prussia, had migrated in large numbers to Ontario, Canada, where they preserved their language, traditions and legends, including their vast vampire lore, which is where we get the story of the Viesczy, the vampire of the Kashubs. Viesczy is a name derived from a term used to describe witches or sorcerers, but aside from them, the Viesczy can also be used to describe someone born with teeth or caul. It was often a common belief in Europe that babies born with teeth or caul were doomed to become vampires, and it was this way that someone became a Viesczy vampire. Once dead, the Viesczy could be detected by bright redness of the face and their left eye open. The vampire began its new existence by chewing on itself, gnawing away at its own body, which is why the Kashubs put a brick under the chin of the dead to keep their mouths closed. Preventative methods used to keep the vampire in its grave and away from the living were to place nets, flaxseed, poplar crosses, and sand in the coffin. Nets were used because it was commonly believed that a vampire could be compelled to untie every knot in the net before they can do anything else. There were other preventative actions as well, ones that were done right after the baby was born, rather than after its death. These included yanking the infant's teeth out and drying the caul and crumbling it into the child's food. Sadistic and horrible, but this is what people once did to save themselves from vampire attack. If none of these safety measures were done, and the Viesczy is left to its own devices, it will leave its grave and murder its entire family, draining each dry of blood. Unfortunately, there was no way to hide from a Viesczy, because this vampire could walk during the day. If using a net to stop the vampire isn't enough, one could kill it completely, which involved chopping the head off and placing it under the corpse's arm. The Asanbosam and Sasabonsam. This one is a twofer. In Guyana and Togo, on the continent of Africa, the Ashanti people have a fascinating and complex mythology, including legends and folklore of vampires. Two such creatures are the Asanbosam and the Sasabonsam, very similar in their habitat and feeding practices, though the Asanbonsam live in trees of the forest and feed mainly on those who dare to wander into their domain. They wait silently in the trees to pounce upon unsuspecting prey, and then rip out their throats with their teeth that are made of iron. This creature is a little unusual looking. Instead of feet, its legs curve at the end, like hooks, which they use to hang from tree branches while they watch for prey to wander into the forests. The Sasabonsam also live in trees, and will drain the blood of those who wander into their territory. These vampires, while humanoid, look very similar to bats. They are mostly human in appearance, with a human face and somewhat human body, save for their arms, which are short and stubby, and for the wings. Their wings are huge. Some legends claim the Sasabonsam to have a wingspan of about 20 feet. The creatures are sometimes described as having emaciated bodies and twisted feet, and sometimes myths tell of these creatures having claws and horns as well, and some myths say they also have iron teeth. Both of these vampires, though tree dwellers, are deadly and vicious. Hi guys, thank you so much for listening to today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel, making sure you hit that notification bell so that you never miss a video. So, until next time, sleep tight.